Welcome to the Get Your Life Together Girl podcast, the ultimate blueprint to self-love and inner peace. I'm your host, Danielle Van. As a cognitive behavioral therapist, life coach, meditation teacher, and author, I've spent my life studying and learning from the stories that make us human. It's my passion and goal to help you shift your mindset and create a lifelong revolution to reach your greatest potential. Let's be honest, fear is a natural experience in our lives, and yet it's the biggest piece of baggage that many of us carry around because it's associated to so many things. Whether it's trauma or emotional understanding, failure, rejection, not being able to get out of the limiting beliefs, it doesn't matter where it comes from. Fear can be a tornado that takes us down and keeps us from fully thriving. In fact, you can write a life blueprint, give yourself a beautiful path, but the minute that fear puts a wall and a boundary around you, there's not much one can do until you move through 7 skill sets that help you get out of fear, eliminate it altogether, and get into a space where you willingly take charge. Use your brain chemistry and function to your benefit, and fully learn to get into a thought process that serves you. And that's exactly what you and I are going to do today in our one-on-one deep dive into eliminating fear. Let's get right to it. The Get Your Life Together Girl podcast starts right now. I'm going to admit, sometimes I do this podcast for my personal benefit, where I'm experiencing something just like you are, and I find myself needing to practice what I teach or what I preach. And I've said that before here, and today's one of those days where I want to talk about fear. I want to talk about standing in your own path and how we create that path and how we can essentially brain hack our way through our experiences, through the moments that are really working to define us. And there really are about 7 ways that we can begin to eliminate fear out of our lives. You know, for me, I actually think that fear isn't as bad as many people think that it is. The fear that I've been experiencing over the last few, maybe months, isn't necessarily fear of the unknown, but fear that I actually am able to do all the things that I want to. That I have enough focus and thought process to create and to be and to do. So for me, fear in this element isn't such a negative thing, but instead a challenge, a motivator. And that's really what I want you to see fear as anyway, regardless if what you fear is positive or negative. I hear a lot of times from the people that come into session with me, male and female, where they talk about fear of being seen, fear of not being heard, fear of their spouse leaving, fear of their partner not knowing who they are, fear of digging in and doing the work to clean up their baggage, fear. And when we talk about fear, we have to talk about how the brain works, how safety is so important, and then we have to identify the components of fear. And so let's do that, right? And let's really think about the fact that you, me, everyone truly has the ability to do the shit that scares us, right? Whether that is needing more time or needing to make a brave move in our lives. Doesn't matter. All comes down to the same thing, right? Being safe, giving ourselves permission, and then doing the damn thing. So let's start with a simple truth, the way your brain works. You've heard me talk about the thoughts, feelings, action cycle if you have been a normal, regular listener here on the podcast, or you follow me on social media or Insight Timer or all the places, right? And if you're not, let's talk about it really quickly because it's very important, especially when we're talking about harder emotions, especially that one of fear. So thought comes in. Your emotional body rises to match the thought, positive or negative. The brain doesn't have an actual filter for that. It's based on your past experiences. It's based on information that you have right now in front of you, the environment, energy, all the things. And then an action occurs. So thought, feeling, action. Another action can be another thought. A lot of times people get caught right there. Like, but I didn't do anything. But you did because you continued to think, right? We have somewhere between 50 and 70, depends on what science you're looking at or who you're listening to, thoughts a day. And in that process, the brain is looking through all of its files to pull out the most useful information. Right? We have something called a negativity bias. I've talked about this many times on the podcast. I will actually link in the show notes an episode where I talk very heavily about the negativity bias. It's very important. But let's think about this. When we are talking about our brain, it operates through patterns, right? That's a pattern that we just went through. Thoughts, feelings, actions. When your brain works through the patterns, the evidence, the negativity bias, right? The negativity built on the past, we begin to face resistance. That's where fear likes to hold itself. But you can actually brain hack this. You can work against the fear by choosing something else. When you face something that you have resistance to, thought comes in, feeling of negativity rises, but you shift and take a different action, the brain operates in a way of reorganizing itself to create a new and better reaction to that emotion. So you can literally do hard shit and change the way you think. Yes, it is a hard thing to do. Yes, it is very counterintuitive. But your brain thanks you by reorganizing itself for a better reaction next time. This is the basis of neuroplasticity. I mean, think about it. When your harsh inner voice appears, fear knocks, it really does ask you to allow it in and to allow the spin cycle of thought to really get underway. And it's in these moments that you have to decide whether you're going to let them in or you're going to let them go. If you let them in, fear loves to hold on. It takes over. It begins to build evidence that you're not good enough. Things aren't going to work out for you, that you can't do the damn thing, whatever it is. It loves to build that evidence. Or you have the ability to decide what path you're going to take. It starts with that discovery question focus that I give to you all the time. And then we begin to look at the 7 strategies that I want to talk about. Because remember, as I said in the beginning, you can write a life blueprint. You can give yourself a path to overcome. But until you do the work to actually put that in place, everything is just words and an idea. It's a goal. It has no action behind it. And so what it looks like when we begin to measure that let go or shift out of fear in those discovery questions sounds like, when my harsh inner voice appears, am I listening to it? Is it helpful or is it harmful? If I recognize that my thoughts in fear are unproductive, I have to ask that question. Is this helpful or is this harmful? For those of us who have highly sensitive nervous systems or who have experienced fight or flight, heavy trauma, guess what? You're going to perceive the world with incredible depth and detail. You're going to feel your feelings bigger, vaster, harder, whatever it is you want to put in there, at a greater level. While we can learn to use this to our benefit on the onset when fear strikes, this can cause a lot of shifting, a lot of overreaction, a lot of looking for the solution while diving deeper into the spiral of negativity. It is a harsh inner voice that comes up when this happens. And so even if you don't have a highly sensitive nervous system, we still want to start questioning, and we start looking at, do I need to shift? Do I need to give myself permission to shift? And another question to ask yourself is, if this doesn't bring me to solution, if it doesn't bring me closer to my values or my goals, what do I want to do about it? What adaptive strategy do I want from this moment? And that's where these learning skills come into place. The truth is, all fear starts somewhere. We may have an experience that brings a thought in, or we could be in our head listening to old stories, listening to that negativity bias, listening to the patterns the brain has already put in front of us, subconsciously telling our stories. The storyteller is what I call the brain. And that could be igniting the fear. So the first thing that we have to look at in learning how to eliminate fear is learning how to trust ourselves. Learning how, this is the important part of trust, to speak to ourselves instead of always listening to ourselves as gospel, really, right? Like the thought comes in and we say, oh, that's the absolute truth without questioning it. If we learn to trust ourselves, we build evidence, right? That fear pathway, that we can make different choices, that we can make mistakes and correct it, that we have the power to circumvent any negative experiences. Listening to ourselves when we are in fear will only breed more fear. Let's put that on the table right now. Unless you're doing something to work through it, to actively bring ourselves to a different place, you're only in a spin cycle of negativity, of more fear, of more baggage, of more negativity. And so we have to get into a place where we begin to talk to ourselves. I am afraid. What are you afraid of? Right? If I just stay in the first thought, I am afraid, the next thought that my brain is going to be seeking is, what happened the last time? When I was afraid, what occurred? And did it work in my favor? Because if it didn't, more fear, more thought process is going to be in that space. But if I learn to question, to talk to myself, to talk to that inner voice and say, what am I afraid of? I give myself the ability to trust. I give myself the ability to shift. And that's so important. We have to get into a space where we question everything. You question people in your life. Why aren't you questioning yourself? You have to get into a place where you are recognizing these fearful thoughts, or any negative thoughts for that matter, and you become an advocate for yourself against yourself. I know that sounds really strange, but think about it. If I can advocate for me against this inner mean person that is in my head telling me what a loser I am, or how fearful I am, or how the story is going to play out, I give myself the upper hand. I give myself an advantage. I don't have to feel this way. There is something else. I cannot do this. Why can't you do it? What about this experience says that you do not have the ability to meet it? What is going on that you do not feel like you are capable? Whether it's fear, whether it's a negative emotion, if you begin to talk to yourself, things change. You begin to eliminate so much. The next thing, the next tool is the ability to thought shuffle. Okay? So you're talking to yourself, and the next piece of that is to just say next, right? I have the ability to hear, to not want to be in this space, and to shuffle the thought. Think about it this way. That negative thought of I cannot do this comes in, and I immediately say next. I have the ability to shift the thought and therefore the result. If I am changing my thoughts, I am going to change the outcome based on how my brain works. Thought comes in, feeling happens, actions taking place. I can't do this. Damn right you can't, said the emotional body. I'm going to take actions of stopping, of getting in my own way, of complaining, of whatever it might be. Or I change the thought. I may not know how to do this yet, but I'm willing to try. There's a totally different emotion that arises around that thought and that feeling, right? And it actually says, you know what? I may be scared, but I'm going to use this as my motivator. And then I take the first step. There's such a big difference. I said in the beginning, I have been in a space of fear, but using it as a motivator. This is it. The conversation with the self, the advocate against the self is that motivator to be able to use the fear to your advantage. The next tool is to identify the components of your fear. As I said, my fear comes down to not having enough time. Am I going to be able to do all the things? And if I'm not, does that look like failure for me? If I don't, does that feel like rejection of my goals? Identify the components of your fear. Is it that you're not measuring up? Is it people pleasing? Is it that you genuinely don't know what to do because you've never been here before? Is it because you have a story in your head that someone said you will fail? What are the components of your fear? You must break it down. Grab a piece of paper, put down the word fear at the top in big bold letters, and begin to say to yourself, what does this feel like? How does this really resonate in my body, in my brain, in my emotional body? What does this fear, sound, smell, taste, seem like to me? So often when people sit in front of me and they begin to tell me about their fear, they begin to tell me all of the components, and yet they don't have the ability to extract those components and say, if I just did something that was counter to this experience of, say, the limiting belief, I would have a different result. Again, I go back, change the thought, change the result. Change the method in which you think. Next, talking to yourself, breaking down the components, it changes the outcome. What are the components? I'll give you a quick example. A lady that I was working with was telling me about her relationship with her daughter. They have a long history of up and down. It is good and bad. It never has an overtone of safety or permission or trust within it. And she said, I don't want to get into a space where I am always reactive. And if I'm reactive, then she rejects me. She doesn't talk to me. I can't get her to answer the phone. I don't know if she's okay. And as she told the story, I nodded and I said, that's a lot. We need to break it all down, but let's break down the fundamental element of this all. You fear that you are going to be rejected if you do not get a handle on your reactions. We have identified the components of your fear. When you feel like there is a rejection factor to your relationship, you feel like a failure as a mom. That's component number 2. And so if you can look at your personal experiences in that way, what is underneath all of this, you have the ability to eliminate the fear because you give yourself a path forward. It's a major tool. The next thing that you can really work on is neutralizing the components. Know and trust that if you know what you are dealing with, that you can actually deal with it. Okay, I know that my reaction is going to cause a problem. Where do I start? I don't work on the fear itself. I work on the component. Think about that. I want to say that again. I don't work on the fear itself. I work on the components. For that mom, the component was the reaction. If I do this, I receive rejection. For me in my life, in my experience, if I don't look at the schedule, if I don't clear space and time and make myself mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, and financially healthy in everything that I do, then guess what? I can feel failure. I don't like feeling like there's failure. Even though I don't believe that there's true failure, I don't like that initial thought of it. So what are the components that you can neutralize? Remember, we can't jump from negative feelings to positive feelings in the same thought. Your brain's actually not wired to do that. So we have to bring everything to a neutral space. Perhaps a relationship is ending for you, and you have a lot of fear of what the future looks like. You're in a negative space. So what are the fear components? Is it financial? Is it emotional? Is it mental? Is it fear of rejection, not knowing what will happen later? Fear of failure? What are those components? Once you recognize them and you bring them to neutrality, meaning not positive, not negative, then you have the ability to deal with them. You can't deal with negative emotions in a negative headspace. All you're going to get is more negativity. So can you bring them to neutral? Meaning I'm looking at the facts. I'm looking at what the impact is. I'm looking at the components. I'm being very logical and rational about the experience. I'm not only making decisions and forward motion out of emotional baggage or emotional reaction. I'm choosing to believe at the very core of everything that I have the ability to succeed. If you do those things, they're very simple, but they actually take a lot of headspace, a lot of work to do, then you have the ability to create trust. You have the ability to create safety and give permission. You have the ability to stop allowing fear to be this baggage that asks to be carried around all the time. If you believe at your core that you are a good person and that you deserve good things, guess what? You're willing to work on the self-mastery elements of things. You know, some of our baggage will show up as fear, and we recognize that we have to work on it. And other things, it shows up as a outer reaction to us, to our experience, to our energy. And then we're forced to deal with things. If you're constantly in a space of having to react in your life, you will constantly live in a space of reaction. Okay? If you're always feeling like fear is going to win, fear will always win. Again, we go back to change the thought, change the outcome. No matter what's happening, keep these things in mind. If your head is always talking trash, downgrading you at every turn, you have the power to stop listening to yourself and start talking to yourself. If you ask yourself the right questions, your mind is going to work to find the right answers. Remember, your brain needs patterns. It needs evidence. It's going to seek a solution if you ask. So what are those right questions? What do I want? How do I want to feel? You have to start talking to yourself in these moments to silence the inner critic. How do I want to experience my life? How do I want to move through this experience in a way that keeps me present? How can I say next? How can I radically care for myself and not confuse my circumstance with my abilities? In everything, your thoughts grow. Fear grows. Neutrality grows. Happiness grows. It's a matter of what your focus is, because that focus is contagious. Just like other people's unhappiness, their complaints, their fear, their joy, their optimism is contagious, so too is your own. Think about that. I am contagious with myself. If I can be an outside advocate to my brain, to my mind, then I most certainly can be an outside influence on how I feel and think. What are you seeking? Are you putting yourself in the places to catch the right contagious feeling? Are you striving to reflect what you feel? Are you striving to get into a place that feels courageous and grounded and happy and purposeful? Are you rooted in fear, or are you rooted in what works for you? Because fear has never solved a problem, and anxiety does not deliver solutions. Fear has never stopped change from coming. The only way through any moment is through it, right? And so you have to say, am I going to allow my brain to stay in a fearful place? Allow myself to continue to run away and put up roadblocks and impasses and excuses? Or am I going to do the damn thing, knowing that all I have to do is talk to myself, be an advocate, take ownership of my life, identify the components of my fear and neutralize them to be able to say next? And then I have a different path. Your blueprint to your life is going to be a lot more pleasurable if you dare to be your own advocate. If you can do that, you will get your life together. If you can do that, everything falls into place. Fear is never going to go away. It's an essential part of our lives. It can be the motivator. The question is, will you allow it to be? Thank you so much for listening to the Get Your Life Together Girl podcast. If you've enjoyed these tips for bettering your life and are seeking daily inspiration, additional tools and tips, if you're not already, follow me on social media. Get Your Life Together Girl on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Clapper, and now Threads. You can also visit my website at getyourlifetogethergirl.com to visit my show notes, my blog, and even a great merch store. There's many new things forthcoming there too, so be sure you check it out each week. If you've enjoyed this episode, I encourage you to share it with a friend or family member, as it helps spread this message to those who may need it. Also, don't forget to hit the notifications on whatever platform that you listen to be reminded of each week's new episode. Thank you so much for being such a valuable member of this community. Until next time, be kind to yourself and others.